The great orbital station hung above Viridian Prime like a jewel in the darkness of space. Inside its massive chambers, the Galactic Council gathered for their Millennium Summit. Representatives from 17 different alien species filled the circular hall, their voices echoing off crystalline walls that had witnessed 1,000 years of debate and decision. Ambassador Gilwen walked through the entrance corridor, her steps measured and calm. She wore the formal blue uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps, and her face showed no emotion. Behind her, 2 human aides carried small cases containing the final documents of their mission. Other delegates barely noticed their arrival. The council was already deep in argument over mining rights in the outer reaches, the Vrelians. Tall beings with silver skin that reflected light like mirrors were shouting at the Korthax representatives. The Korthax looked like massive bears covered in golden fur, and they roared back with equal anger. Both species wanted the same asteroid field. Both claimed ancient rights to the minerals there. The debate had lasted for 3 days already, going in circles with no resolution. G1 took her seat in the human section, a small area near the back of the chamber. Humans had been council members for 300 years, but they still occupied the least important position in the room. The oldest species, the Archons, floated near the center in their crystalline forms. They barely acknowledged anyone younger than 1,000,000 years. Next came the Vrelians and Korthax, then the insectoid chitters who clicked and buzzed among themselves. Humans were always last. She remembered her first day as ambassador, 15 years ago. She had arrived full of hope and ideas. Earth had so much to offer the galaxy. Human engineers had solved problems with energy efficiency that plagued interstellar travel. Human doctors had developed medicines that worked across multiple species. Human scientists made discoveries every year that pushed the boundaries of knowledge. She thought the council would welcome these contributions. Instead, they ignored her. When she proposed a joint medical research initiative, the Archons dismissed it without discussion. When human engineers offered to help upgrade the council's communication network, the Vrelians laughed and said they had been building such systems before Earth had invented the wheel. When she suggested new trade routes that would benefit smaller species, the Korthax blocked the proposal, claiming it threatened their monopolies. For 3 centuries, humanity had tried to be good members of the galactic community. They shared their technology freely. They volunteered for humanitarian missions. They sent their best people to help other species solve problems. And for 3 centuries, the council treated them like children who should be seen and not heard. The chairman, Voroses, finally noticed Juon standing. The crystalline being flickered with light, a sign of mild annoyance. Does the human representative have something to add to this discussion? The tone made it clear that human input was not actually wanted. Guan stepped forward to the speaking platform. Around the chamber, delegates continued their private conversations. Few even looked at her. She had prepared a speech, something diplomatic and carefully worded. But standing there, looking at the dismissive faces of species who thought themselves superior, she decided to speak simply instead. The human delegation wishes to announce our withdrawal from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. For a moment, silence filled the chamber. Then laughter erupted from multiple sections. The chitters clicked their mandibles in what sounded like mockery. Several Vrelian delegates actually turned their backs. A Korthax representative made a comment in his own language that the translator rendered as good riddance to irritating pests. Voroses flickered again. This is unexpected. May we ask the reason for this decision? Guan pulled out a data tablet and began reading. Her voice remained steady and professional. For 300 years, humanity has submitted 472 proposals to this council. Of those 3 were approved, all minor trade adjustments that cost the council nothing. We have volunteered for 193 humanitarian missions. We have shared 1,047 technological innovations through open research programs. We have trained 15,000 specialists from other species in human universities and research centers, asking nothing in return. She paused and looked around the chamber. A few delegates were actually listening now, though most still seemed amused. In exchange, the council has blocked every major initiative we proposed. You have vetoed our attempts to provide disaster relief to species in crisis, claiming non-interference policies that you ignore when it suits your interests. You have manipulated trade agreements to favor your own species while disadvantaging human commerce. You have excluded us from every important committee and decision-making body. Came here hoping to be partners, Giwan continued. We believe that sharing knowledge and working together would benefit everyone. But this council does not want partners. You want servants, or perhaps entertainment? You want to feel superior to the young species who still have hope that cooperation matters. A Vrelian delegate stood up, his silver skin flashing with anger. How dare you insult this ancient institution? Humanity has existed for mere moments in galactic time. You should be grateful we allowed you to join at all. We were grateful, Jiwan replied calmly. That gratitude has expired. Humanity no longer sees value in this membership. We withdraw peacefully and completely. Our diplomats will leave Council territory within 1 week. Our trade vessels will conclude their business and depart. Our research cooperation programs will be terminated. Our humanitarian volunteers will return home. We wish you well in your future endeavors. She placed the data tablet on the speaking platform. It contained the formal documents, all properly filed according to council procedure. Giwan had made sure everything was correct and legal. Then she turned and walked toward the exit, her aides following behind. Voroses called after her. If this is a negotiating tactic to gain concessions, it will not work. The council does not respond to threats. Giwan stopped and looked back. This is not a negotiation. This is a farewell. Humanity is done here. Then she left the chamber. The laughter resumed as the doors closed behind her. Delegates returned to their argument about mining rights, as if nothing important had happened. Voroses accepted the withdrawal with a brief statement. Acknowledging humanity's decision and expressing hollow hopes for future cooperation, the meeting continued for 3 more days before finally reaching a compromise that satisfied no one. Meanwhile, across council space, human diplomatic stations began shutting down. The process was organized and efficient. Staff packed their belongings, closed accounts, and filed all necessary departure paperwork. Human trade vessels finished their current contracts, then left alien ports heading for home. Research teams concluded their projects, handed over their work, and boarded transport ships. There was no anger, no protest, no dramatic gesture. Humans simply left. Within 1 standard galactic week, every human presence in Council territory had vanished. The stations stood empty. The research labs were cleaned and closed. The trade ports were quiet. Humanity had withdrawn in complete silence. On Nova Sol, Director Minho watched reports from across the galaxy. Every human facility had reported successful evacuation. Every citizen was accounted for. Operation Silent Departure was complete. He allowed himself a small smile. The council thought humans were irrelevant. Soon, they would learn exactly how wrong they were. But that lesson would come in its own time. For now, humanity would watch and wait in silence. 3 months passed since humanity's departure, and most of the Galactic Council had already forgotten about it. The Vrelians and Korthax finally settled their mining dispute. The Archons continued floating in their chambers, contemplating mathematical problems that would take centuries to solve. The Chitters expanded their colony worlds, buzzing happily about new territories. Life in Council space went on as it always had. Then small problems started appearing. The first issue came to light on a Vrelian communication station, orbiting their capital world. The long-distance arrays that connected their empire across 40 star systems began experiencing strange failures. Messages would arrive garbled or not arrive at all. Video calls would freeze or disconnect randomly. The problems were small at first, just annoying glitches that happened occasionally, but they got worse. Within 2 weeks, the failures increased from once a day to once an hour. Vrelian engineers arrived to investigate. They ran diagnostics and checked the hardware. Everything appeared normal, but the systems kept malfunctioning. Finally, they pulled up the maintenance logs and discovered something troubling. For the past 50 years, a team of human technicians had been handling the complex calibration protocols for these arrays. The humans had come as part of a technical exchange program, offering their expertise freely. They had developed new maintenance procedures that made the arrays run more efficiently and reliably. The Varelians had been happy to let them do this work, considering it beneath their own engineers. Now those humans were gone. The maintenance manuals they had written were still available, thick documents explaining every step of the process. But reading instructions and actually doing the work were different things. The Varelian engineers tried to follow the procedures, but they lacked the practical experience. Repairs that used to take days now required weeks. Some problems they could not fix at all. The Varelian High Command sent urgent requests to other council species, asking for technical assistance. Most could not help. Their own communication systems used different technology. A few sent engineers, but those engineers were just as confused by the complex procedures as the Varelians. The problems continued to spread through the network. On Korthok's agricultural worlds, farmers noticed their crops were not growing as well. The giant vegetables that fed billions of Korthak citizens were smaller this season. Yields dropped by 15%, then 20%, then 30%. Agricultural experts rushed to investigate. They tested the soil, checked the weather patterns, examined the irrigation systems. Nothing obvious was wrong. One old farmer remembered something. 20 years ago, human bioengineers had visited as part of a research exchange. They had been fascinated by Korthak's farming methods and asked endless questions. In return, they had shared some of their own techniques. Little adjustments to planting schedules, slight modifications to fertilizer mixtures, new crop rotation patterns that improved soil health. The changes had seemed minor at the time, but they had made a huge difference. Crop yields had increased steadily over the following years. The Korthaks had been pleased, though they never officially thanked the humans or gave them credit. They assumed their own superior farming knowledge had simply matured further. Now, without ongoing human consultation and the subtle adjustments those engineers made each season, the delicate balance was falling apart. The Korthak's government tried to recreate the human techniques from old research papers, but the papers explained the theory, not the practice. They described what to do, but not exactly how to do it or when conditions required variations. Food production continued to decline. Prices started rising across Korthak's territory. The government ordered emergency grain reserves to be distributed, but those reserves were not infinite. Celestial Haven, the luxury station where council elites spent their wealth on entertainment, experienced its own crisis. The entire entertainment district went dark one morning. Every holographic display, every gaming platform, every virtual reality suite stopped working at the same time. Thousands of wealthy tourists found themselves with nothing to do. The station manager called emergency technical meetings. Her staff investigated frantically. They discovered that every entertainment system on the station used software and hardware manufactured by human corporations. The systems had always worked perfectly, so nobody had worried about where they came from or how they functioned. Now they were broken, and replacement parts were not available. Human companies no longer traded with council species. A technician named Hyjin had maintained all these systems until 3 months ago. She had been friendly and helpful, always fixing problems quickly. Before she left, she had filed detailed documentation about every system on the station. The station's own technicians pulled up her files and tried to follow her instructions. But Hyjin had been an expert with years of experience. Her documentation was clear for someone with her knowledge. But baffling to anyone else, the entertainment district stayed dark. Revenue from tourism dropped to almost nothing. The station manager sent desperate messages to human trade ports, offering enormous sums of money for Hyjin to return and fix the systems. The messages went unanswered. Humanity had withdrawn completely. At council headquarters, a human bureaucrat named Taijin sat in a small cafe, drinking tea and watching news reports on his tablet. He had chosen to remain behind when humanity left, resigning his position and retiring on a neutral station. He had worked for the council for 40 years, always trying to help them understand how integrated human contributions had become. He remembered the meetings where he had tried to warn them. He had created detailed reports showing how many systems relied on human technology. He had explained that humans were not just another member species, but had become essential to galactic infrastructure. The council representatives had barely listened. Some had laughed at his concerns. The Archons had told him that nothing so young could be essential to anything. Now his tablet showed news of failures spreading across council space. Communication networks failing. Food shortages beginning. Entertainment systems offline. And these were just the early problems. Taijin knew there were much bigger issues coming. He had seen the classified reports about energy distribution, quantum relay networks, medical supplies, and security systems. All of them had significant human involvement. He finished his tea and wondered how long it would take for the council to understand what they had lost. Pride was a powerful thing. They would probably try to fix everything themselves first, spending enormous resources to replace human expertise. Only when that failed would they consider reaching out, if they ever did. On a council warship patrolling the border regions, the captain noticed something odd. His tactical display was showing enemy positions incorrectly. Pirate ships that should appear as red dots were blue. Friendly vessels were sometimes marked as unknown. The navigation system suggested inefficient routes. Weapons targeting was off by several degrees. He called the ship's programmer to the bridge. She investigated and found that much of their tactical software had been optimized by human developers 5 years ago. After a terrible battle where coordination failures cost many lives, a team led by a programmer named Kyung had volunteered to help improve the systems. Their work had been remarkably effective. Battle performance improved dramatically. Casualties decreased. The pirate threat that had plagued the sector was eventually eliminated. The improvements had been so successful that the council military adopted them across their entire fleet. Now those systems needed updates and security patches. The pirate groups, though diminished, were learning to exploit the vulnerabilities that were appearing. Without the human programmers to maintain the code, the military advantage was slowly disappearing. Reports of these various problems began reaching council headquarters. At first, officials dismissed them as unrelated technical issues. These things happened sometimes. But as the reports multiplied and the pattern became clear, some council members started asking uncomfortable questions. How much had humans really contributed to galactic infrastructure? Where did they source their advanced materials? How had they solved energy problems that other species struggled with? Who would maintain all the systems they had built or improved? An emergency session was called. The council gathered to discuss the situation. Most members still refused to believe this was serious. They voted to allocate emergency funds for reverse engineering human technology and training their own experts. The budget was massive, millions of credits dedicated to replacing human expertise. Engineering teams were assembled. Scientists were hired. Research programs were started. The council committed fully to proving they did not need humanity. They were advanced civilizations with millions of years of experience. Surely, they could figure out what some young species had done, but the problems kept getting worse. The solutions kept failing. And in the human trade port of New Busan, Engineer Daeho monitored council communications and smiled. He sent a secure message to Director Minho on Nova Sol. The cascade was beginning, exactly as they had predicted. The council's pride would be their downfall. Humanity would watch from a safe distance as the lesson unfolded. 6 months after humanity's departure, small problems had become a crisis. What started as minor inconveniences now threatened the stability of the entire Galactic Council. The failures were cascading, each one triggering others in an expanding wave of dysfunction. The interstellar shipping industry collapsed first. Thousands of cargo vessels that moved goods between star systems suddenly found themselves burning twice as much fuel as before. Ship captains were confused and angry. Their engines were the same, their routes unchanged. But their fuel efficiency had dropped dramatically. Investigation revealed the cause. Over the past century, human engineers had developed modifications to standard ship engines. These modifications were not secret or proprietary. Humans had published them in open-source technical repositories, free for anyone to use. Shipbuilders across the galaxy had adopted them because they worked beautifully, improving fuel consumption by 40%. But those modifications required regular maintenance updates. The base engine designs were solid, but the human improvements needed periodic adjustments to account for wear patterns and changing conditions. Without human engineers providing those updates, the modifications began failing. Engines reverted to their old, wasteful operation. Fuel prices had already been rising because of the Korthax agricultural crisis. Now they quadrupled as demand exceeded supply. Shipping companies tried to absorb the costs but could not. Profit margins disappeared. Trade routes that had been profitable for centuries became money-losing ventures. Small shipping companies went bankrupt first, then larger ones. Entire trade networks collapsed. Worlds that depended on imported food faced starvation. Manufacturing planets could not get raw materials. Luxury goods became impossibly expensive. The galactic economy, which had grown steadily for millennia, went into sharp decline. Unemployment spread. Social unrest followed. And the Council had no solution because they did not have human engineers to restore the modifications. The medical crisis hit even harder because it killed people directly. Pharmaceutical companies across Council space discovered that many of their most important medicines relied on chemical synthesis processes developed by human researchers. The humans had published their work in scientific journals, sharing their discoveries with everyone. But understanding the theory and actually doing the synthesis were different skills, Dr. Yuna, working in a hospital on the human colony world of New Jeju, received desperate messages from former colleagues. Alien doctors she had trained were begging for help. Their patients were dying because critical medications were no longer available. The synthesis processes were failing and nobody could figure out why. Yuna read the messages with sadness. She had worked alongside these doctors for years. She had taught them surgical techniques and shared human medical knowledge freely. They had been friends, or so she thought. But when Ambassador Jiwan announced humanity's withdrawal, none of them had spoken up. None had questioned the Council's dismissive treatment of humans. Now, they needed help, and Yuna faced a difficult choice. She forwarded the messages to the human embassy with a polite note. She explained that she wanted to help, but humanity was no longer a Council member and could not interfere in Council affairs. Those were the same words the Council had used countless times to reject human offers of assistance. The embassy sent her response back to the alien doctors. There were no follow-up messages. The Chitter Swarm worlds experienced the worst disaster. Their atmospheric processors, which maintained breathable air on 14 colony planets, began failing catastrophically. The Chitters had used the same processor technology for thousands of years, maintained through institutional knowledge passed from one generation to the next. The systems were ancient but reliable. Then, 15 years ago, a human environmental engineer named Sunho had visited during a humanitarian mission. He studied their atmospheric processors and suggested improvements. The Chitters had been skeptical, but Sunho was persuasive, and his ideas seemed sound. He helped them modernize the systems, making them more efficient and easier to maintain. The improvements were remarkable. Energy consumption dropped by half. Processing capacity increased. Maintenance became simpler. The Chitters were so impressed that they upgraded all 14 colony worlds to the new design. They discontinued their old methods entirely, considering them obsolete. Now the modernized systems were failing. The Chitters tried to return to their old methods, but they had lost that knowledge when they abandoned it. An entire generation of engineers had trained only on Sunho's designs. They could not rebuild the ancient systems because nobody remembered how, and they could not fix Sunho's systems because he was not there to help. Atmospheric composition began destabilizing on all 14 worlds. Oxygen levels dropped. Carbon dioxide accumulated. The Chitters could tolerate these changes temporarily, but not for long. Evacuation became necessary. Billions of Chitters fled their colony worlds in a chaotic exodus that overwhelmed every available transport ship. The humanitarian crisis was unlike anything the Council had faced in living memory. Refugee fleets arrived at neighboring star systems, desperate for help, but those systems were struggling with their own problems. Food shortages, economic collapse, and technical failures had stretched everyone's resources to breaking. Old grudges and territorial disputes resurfaced. Species that had maintained peace for centuries suddenly refused to accept refugees. Violence erupted in several systems as Chitta refugees tried to land without permission. Council peacekeeping forces attempted to intervene, but found their own systems failing. The tactical coordination software that had worked so well for 5 years was now full of vulnerabilities. Pirate groups, emboldened by the chaos, increased their attacks. Sectors that had been safe became dangerous. Council security officers discovered the source of their tactical problems. A team of human programmers, led by someone named Hyung, had volunteered to optimize their military systems after a devastating series of pirate attacks. The improvements had been dramatic. Response times improved, casualties decreased, and the pirate threat was nearly eliminated. But that success depended on continuous updates and security patches that no longer came. The Crystalline Archons, who considered themselves the wisest and most advanced species in the galaxy, faced their own humiliation. Their computational networks, which had functioned flawlessly for millions of years, began producing errors. The Archons prided themselves on mathematical supremacy. Their ability to calculate probabilities and predict outcomes was legendary. But suddenly, their predictions were wrong. Investigation revealed that a human mathematician named Yemen had revolutionized their probability. Algorithms during an academic exchange program 30 years ago, his work had been integrated so deeply into their systems that removing it would require rebuilding everything. The Archons had accepted his contributions because they were brilliant, though they never publicly acknowledged their source. Now, without updates and refinements, the algorithms were degrading. Errors compounded. The legendary Archon foresight became unreliable. Chairman Varoses called an emergency session of the full council. The chamber was more crowded than Juan had ever seen it, 6 months ago when she announced humanity's departure. Every delegate attended. Every species sent their highest officials. The mood was grim. Varoses flickered with agitated light as he addressed the assembly. We face the worst crisis in council history. Our infrastructure is failing. Our economy is collapsing. Our people are suffering. We allocated massive resources to replace human contributions, but our efforts have failed. I propose we send an official delegation to humanity and request renewed cooperation. The chamber erupted in argument. Many delegates still refused to accept that primitive humanity could be so essential. Avrelian representatives stood and shouted that they simply needed more time and funding. The problems were temporary. They would solve them eventually. They could not beg for help from species so young. A Korthax delegate argued that requesting human assistance would make the council look weak. It would damage their reputation across the galaxy. Better to continue struggling than to admit they needed humans. Other species would lose respect for the council. Their authority would crumble. But others saw the reality clearly. A delegate from one of the smaller species stood and spoke quietly. Her people had benefited from human aid programs many times. She had always appreciated humanity's generosity, though she had never had the courage to oppose the larger species when they dismissed humans. Now she found that courage. We are already weak, she said. We are already struggling. Our reputation is already damaged because we are failing. Billions suffer while we protect our pride. I propose we do what we should have done 300 years ago. We should treat humanity as equals and partners. We should ask for their help, not from a position of superiority, but from humility and respect. The debate continued for hours. Practical necessity fought against ancient pride. Finally, a vote was called. The proposal to send a delegation passed by the narrowest possible margin. Half the council voted against it, even as their own systems failed around them. Varoses was selected to lead the delegation. Along with representatives from the species suffering most severely, they prepared to travel to Nova Sol, to meet with Director Minho and request humanity's return. None of them knew whether humans would even agree to meet with them, let alone help. On Nova Sol, Minho received the request for a meeting. He read it carefully, then smiled. He had expected this moment, though he thought it might take longer. The council's pride had fallen faster than predicted. He sent a response agreeing to meet with them. The real test was about to begin. Would the council truly change, or would they simply want to use humanity again while maintaining their old attitudes? The meeting would reveal everything. 1 year after humanity's silent departure, 3 council civilizations stood on the edge of total collapse. The crisis that began with small technical failures had grown into an existential threat. The Galactic Council, which had maintained peace and order for millions of years, was falling apart. The Varelian sovereignty faced civil war. Their communication network had fragmented into isolated planetary systems that could barely talk to each other. The empire that once coordinated governance across 40 star systems had lost the ability to function as a unified whole. Local governors unable to receive orders or guidance from the central government began making independent decisions. Some declared autonomy. Others formed regional alliances. Ancient rivalries between colony worlds resurfaced, the Varelian High. Command tried to hold their empire together through military force, but their fleets could not coordinate without working communications. Ships sent to enforce central authority sometimes fought each other by mistake, unable to identify. Friend from foe. The legendary Varelian unity, maintained for 10,000 years, shattered in months. Revolution seemed inevitable. The Korthax Collective watched helplessly as famine spread across their agricultural worlds. Crop failures had reduced food production to half of normal levels. The emergency reserves were exhausted. Neighboring species sent aid, but the quantities were insufficient, and the prices were astronomical. The Korthax economy, once among the strongest in council space, was destroyed. Millions of Korthax citizens fled their homeworlds, seeking food and work elsewhere. But the galaxy was in crisis everywhere. Nobody wanted refugees. Border systems turned away the fleeing Korthax, sometimes with violence. Ancient grudges between the Korthax and their neighbors, suppressed for centuries by prosperity, returned with fury. Battles erupted over territory and resources. The Korthax Collective was not just starving, it was disintegrating. The Chitter Swarm had already lost 3 entire colony worlds when atmospheric processors failed completely. Billions had evacuated in chaos. Now those refugees lived in overcrowded temporary settlements on other worlds, straining resources and testing the patience of host species. The remaining 11 colony worlds were on borrowed time. Their atmospheric processors were degrading daily. Engineers worked desperately to maintain them, but they were fighting a losing battle. The Chitters, who had mocked humanity most viciously during Ambassador Jiwan's departure speech, faced a bitter irony. Human-designed emergency shelter systems were the only ones capable of housing Chitter biology in non-standard atmospheres. Those systems were no longer available. Casualties mounted as Chitters died from exposure to incompatible air. The suffering was immense and unnecessary, caused entirely by pride and dismissiveness. Into this chaos arrived the council delegation led by Chairman Verosis. Their ship approached Nova Sol with caution, unsure of the reception they would receive. The human colony world looked prosperous from orbit. Cities gleamed with lights. Orbital stations bustled with activity. Trade ships came and went constantly. While council space burned, human civilization clearly flourished. Director Minho received the delegation in a conference room overlooking the capital city. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed a thriving metropolis below. Parks, buildings, and transportation networks all functioned perfectly. The contrast with council space was deliberate and stark. Minho wanted the delegation to see exactly what they had dismissed as irrelevant. Voroses entered first, his crystalline form flickering with what might have been nervousness. Behind him came representatives from the Varelians, Korthax, and Chitters, the species suffering most severely. They all looked diminished somehow, their previous arrogance replaced by desperation. Minho greeted them courteously and offered refreshments. He was polite, but not warm. This was not a reunion of friends. This was a negotiation between parties with very different positions. The delegation sat in comfortable chairs designed to accommodate various alien physiologies. Minho sat across from them, waiting. Voroses began speaking. His voice, normally confident and commanding, sounded uncertain. He explained the crisis affecting council space. He described the failures in communications, agriculture, atmosphere processing, medicine, security, and dozens of other systems. He detailed the suffering, the deaths, the economic collapse, and the looming possibility of total societal breakdown. "We come to request emergency assistance," Voroses concluded. "The Galactic Council humbly asks humanity to help us restore our failing systems and prevent further catastrophe." Minho listened without interrupting. When Voroses finished, silence filled the room. Minho let it stretch uncomfortably before speaking. His voice was calm but direct. "Why should humanity help you?" The question hung in the air. Voroses flickered with confusion. "Because billions of lives are at stake. Because the crisis threatens civilizations that have existed for millions of years. Because preventing suffering is the moral thing to do." "Those are good reasons," Minho agreed, "but they are the same reasons humanity offered help for 300 years. We proposed humanitarian missions that would have prevented some of these problems. The Council vetoed them, citing non-interference policies that you selectively ignore. We shared technology freely that could have avoided these failures. You accepted our gifts, but treated us with contempt. We asked to be partners. You treated us as servants or entertainment." The Vrelian delegate started to speak, but Minho raised his hand. "Ambassador Juan stood in your council chamber 1 year ago and explained clearly why humanity was leaving. She listed our contributions and your dismissive responses. She described how you blocked our initiatives, manipulated trade against us, and excluded us from meaningful participation." "Do you remember what happened when she finished speaking?" "We laughed," Voroses admitted quietly. "We mocked her. We thought humanity was throwing a tantrum," Minho confirmed. "And then we left. Peacefully, completely, and permanently. We fulfilled all our contracts. We closed our facilities properly. We left detailed documentation for every system we had built or improved. We did everything correctly and legally. And now you ask why we should help?" The Korthax representative, a massive golden-furred being who looked gaunt from hunger, spoke with desperation. "We understand we treated you poorly. We were wrong. But our people are starving. Children are dying. Can you not set aside the past for the sake of innocents who did nothing wrong?" Minho's expression softened slightly. "Your suffering is real, and it moves me. But you misunderstand the situation. This is not about revenge. Humanity is not punishing you by withholding help. We simply no longer have any obligation to provide it." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. "For 3 centuries, we tried to be good council members. We shared everything we had. We helped anyone who asked. We expected nothing except basic respect and the chance to participate equally in galactic affairs. We didn't receive even that minimum courtesy, so we left. And we discovered something important. We don't need the council. Our trade networks with non-council species are more profitable and equitable. Our colonies thrive without council bureaucracy slowing every decision. Our scientists make faster progress without council regulations blocking innovative research. Our people are happier without the constant reminder that we are considered inferior." Minho turned back to face the delegation. "The question is not why we should help you. The question is, what has changed that would make cooperation worthwhile for humanity?" Voroses understood. This was a negotiation, but not the kind he expected. Minho was not asking for concessions or payment. He was asking for something more fundamental. "What do you want from us?" "Acknowledgement," Minho said simply. "Not just privately in this room, but publicly before the entire galaxy. The Council must acknowledge what happened. You must recognize that your arrogance and dismissiveness caused this catastrophe. You must admit that humanity's contributions were essential, not trivial. You must apologize for 3 centuries of contempt." The delegates shifted uncomfortably. Public admission of such massive failure would be humiliating. The Council's reputation would be damaged, perhaps permanently. But what choice did they have? And there must be structural change, Minho continued. If humanity returns to help, it will not be as junior members of the old council. That institution failed. You need a new system where all species, regardless of age or size, are treated as genuine equals. Where wisdom is measured by contribution, not by how long your species has existed. He outlined his vision for a reformed galactic assembly. Equal voting rights for all members, transparent decision-making processes, fair trade practices enforced by neutral arbiters, humanitarian concerns given priority over political maneuvering. It was everything the old council had refused to implement. These are our conditions, Minho concluded. Meet them, and humanity will help. Not because we owe you anything, but because preventing suffering is indeed the moral thing to do. We will send volunteers like Engineer Sunho to restore Chitter atmospheric processors. Dr. Yuna will organize medical teams to help with pharmaceutical synthesis. Technician Hyjin will train your engineers in system maintenance. All as humanitarian aid, not as council obligations. Rosas and the delegation departed to present these terms to the full council. The debate that followed was the most bitter in council history. Many species refused to accept the conditions. They argued that publicly admitting fault would destroy their credibility, that restructuring the council would diminish their power, that accepting humanity as equals was unthinkable, but reality had a way of forcing difficult decisions. 3 more Chitter colony worlds failed. The Vrelian Civil War began in earnest. Korthak's famine deaths reached millions. The suffering became impossible to ignore. Finally, by the narrowest margin, the council voted to accept Minho's conditions. They issued a formal public apology to humanity. They acknowledged their failures and humanity's essential contributions. They invited humans to return not as junior members, but as equal partners in a restructured galactic assembly. The announcement humiliated them. But it also began the healing. The galaxy changed on the day the Galactic Council published their apology. The announcement spread across every communication network. Translated into thousands of languages, broadcast to billions of beings on countless worlds. For the first time in millions of years, the ancient species admitted they had been wrong. The statement was direct and honest. The Council acknowledged that they had dismissed humanity's contributions as irrelevant. They admitted that their pride and arrogance had blinded them to the value of cooperation. They recognized that treating younger species with contempt had caused the greatest crisis in galactic history. And they apologized formally and publicly for 3 centuries of disrespect. The reaction across the galaxy was shock. Many species could barely believe what they were reading. The proud Archons, who considered themselves superior to everyone, had signed this apology. The powerful Vrelians and Korthaks had admitted their failures. The old certainties of hierarchy and ancient privilege had crumbled in a single document. Ambassador Guan returned to galactic affairs. But everything was different now. She walked into the new galactic assembly chambers as co-chair, alongside Verozes. The seating arrangement had changed completely. There were no ranks, no hierarchy of importance. Every species sat in a circle, positioned randomly, all equal in the eyes of the assembly. The human section was no longer in the back. There was no back anymore. The first meeting of the reformed assembly established new principles. Every member species received equal voting rights, regardless of how long they had existed or how large their territory. Decisions would be made transparently, with full records available to all citizens. Trade practices would be monitored by independent arbiters to prevent manipulation. Humanitarian concerns would take priority over political maneuvering. Any member could propose initiatives without needing approval from senior species. It was everything the old council had refused to implement. And it was only possible because the old system had failed so catastrophically that change became unavoidable. Human volunteers began spreading across former council space to address the crises their expertise could resolve. Engineer Sunho led a team to the Chitter colony worlds. He arrived to find desperate conditions. Billions of Chitters lived in temporary shelters, breathing air that was slowly poisoning them. The remaining atmospheric processors were days from complete failure. Sunho worked 18-hour days, training chitter engineers while simultaneously repairing the failing systems. He was patient and thorough, explaining not just what to do, but why each step mattered. He shared human knowledge freely, holding nothing back. The chitters, who had once mocked humans so viciously, now listened to every word with desperate attention. Within 3 months, atmospheric processors on all 11 surviving colony worlds were stabilized. Within 6 months, they were operating better than before the crisis. Sunho's team helped the chitters rebuild the 3 lost worlds, implementing newer designs that would be more reliable and easier to maintain. The engineers he trained became experts themselves, able to handle future problems independently. Before leaving, Sunho met with the Chitter Planetary Council. They thanked him formally, but he could see shame in their multifaceted eyes. They remembered their laughter when G1 announced humanity's departure. They remembered calling humans irrelevant pests. Now those same humans had saved billions of chitter lives, asking nothing in return. Dr. Yuna organized medical teams that traveled to worlds facing pharmaceutical crises. She brought human doctors and chemists who understood the synthesis processes that were failing. But she also brought teachers. Yuna established an exchange program where alien medical students could study at human universities while human students learned from alien medical traditions. The program was revolutionary. For the first time, medical knowledge flowed in both directions. Human doctors learned Korthak's surgical techniques that were remarkably effective for certain conditions. Varelian physicians taught humans about treating injuries with light-based therapies. Archon medical researchers shared insights into treating crystalline lifeforms. Everyone benefited from sharing instead of hoarding knowledge. Within a year, the pharmaceutical crisis ended. Production resumed on critical medicines. But more importantly, a new generation of doctors emerged who had trained alongside colleagues from other species. They carried forward a spirit of cooperation that would reshape galactic medicine for centuries. Technician Hyjin opened a consulting firm that helped council species modernize their systems while maintaining sovereignty over their own technology. She refused to simply fix things and leave. Instead, she insisted on training local technicians so they could handle future maintenance themselves. Her firm employed thousands of humans and aliens working together on complex technical problems. The entertainment district on Celestial Haven came back online better than before. Hajin's team not only restored the old systems but upgraded them with the latest human innovations. The station became more popular than ever. And this time the station manager made sure to properly credit and compensate the human engineers who made it possible. Developer Kuhn helped council military forces update their security systems. He worked with alien programmers to patch vulnerabilities and improve coordination software. But he also helped them understand the principles behind the code so they would not be dependent on humans for every update. The pirate threat that had resurged during the crisis was pushed back again, this time by a military that understood its own systems. The recovery was slow and expensive, but progress was measurable and real. The Varelian sovereignty stabilized as communication networks were restored. The empire emerged smaller and more decentralized than before, but also more resilient. Local governors maintained more autonomy, which actually improved decision-making. The Varelians learned that central control was not always superior to distributed governance. The Korthaks Collective rebuilt their agricultural systems with human assistance, but also with new partners. Species they had once ignored now contributed technologies of their own. A small species known for botanical research shared techniques for soil enhancement. Another species offered irrigation designs that used water more efficiently. The famine ended, replaced by the beginnings of genuine food security based on diverse methods rather than a single approach. Director Minho, now serving as humanity's chief diplomat, reflected on the transformation from his office on Nova Sol. Through his window, he could see the thriving human capital. But he also saw alien delegations visiting constantly, no longer as superiors granting audiences, but as equals seeking cooperation. Humanity had never wanted dominance. They simply wanted to help and be respected for it. The silent departure had not been revenge, but a lesson. By removing themselves peacefully, humans demonstrated the value of what they had freely given. The Council learned what happened when cooperation was replaced by contempt. New species began joining the reformed Galactic Assembly, attracted by its equitable structure. Among them were civilizations that had quietly traded with humanity during the isolation year. They brought innovations of their own, and the exchange of knowledge accelerated beyond anything the old Council had achieved. Mathematician Yemen returned to work with Archon scholars. Together, they pushed the boundaries of predictive science far beyond what either could have done alone. The Archons, who had once been too proud to acknowledge Yemen's contributions, now publicly credited him as a partner in their greatest discoveries. Both species acknowledged that together they achieved what neither could accomplish separately. On Nova Sol, a monument was erected commemorating the silent departure. It stood in the central plaza, where thousands of citizens and visitors passed daily. The sculpture depicted Ambassador Ji-Wan walking away from the council chambers, her face calm and dignified. Carrying her final documents, the inscription was simple but powerful. They dismissed our voice, so we let our silence speak. They ignored our presence, so we showed them our absence. Not in anger, but in hope that one day they would understand. Visitors from across the galaxy came to see the monument. Many stood before it in quiet contemplation. Some felt shame, remembering how they had treated humans. Others felt inspiration, seeing proof that change was possible. All understood the lesson it represented. The galaxy was forever changed. The old certainties of hierarchy based on age had crumbled. Ancient privilege no longer guaranteed respect or influence. In their place grew something new and fragile, true alliance, where wisdom was measured by contribution rather than longevity, and where even the youngest species could teach the oldest new truths. The Galactic Assembly was not perfect. There were still disagreements and conflicts. Some species struggled to abandon old prejudices. Progress was uneven and sometimes frustrating, but the fundamental principle had shifted. Everyone was equal. Everyone had value. Everyone deserved respect. Humanity's role in this new galaxy was unique. They were not the strongest military power or the largest economy. They were not the oldest civilization or the most technically advanced in every field. But they had something that proved essential: a genuine desire to help others and share what they knew. Across human space, people like Hyjin, Deho Yuna, and Sunho continued their work. They were joined by thousands of others,